Well, I couldn't put a beehive on my head. So instead, I have a bee accompanying me this evening uh, and a pineapple. I'm going to see how long I can balance with that pineapple on my head, which is representing the bees who fly around the head of Bingo Pajama in the novel. Whoops, there she goes. There goes that pineapple. In the novel Jitterbug Perfume. I feel the pineapple somehow represents Bingo Pajama. I'm not quite sure why, but I'm going to keep with that metaphor. A pineapple is a bit like a beehive. So we're going to come on to the question of who is Bingo Pajama in the near future. But first, I'm going to introduce you to Tom Robbins himself, the author of this fabulous novel. I'm just noticing that the Facebook camera does look a bit blurry. So I'm just going to try and wipe that camera before we go any further. But welcome to everyone that's joining me. Hi, Colleen. Lovely to see you again. Hi, Nora. Hi, Barry from Scotland. Great to see you too. Just going to give this camera a wipe and see if that makes any difference. Sorry to the sudden darkness. Not sure if it has. I think it might be something I'll have to return to later, but sorry if it is a little bit blurry. Do tell me, Facebook viewers, if your visuals are okay. Ollie, great to see you this evening. Thanks for coming. I know how much you love this book. I know you said you've read it twice, which is fantastic. It is actually my desert island book, Jitterbug Perfume. So people that haven't read it, you or haven't even heard of Tom Robbins, you might well be asking why? Why is it such an important book in my life? And why also do I prescribe it to so many people? It's one of my top prescriptions that I give to bibliotherapy clients. So I will be explaining that during the course of this evening. But before we get going on Jitterbug Perfume itself, I'm going to tell you about Tom Robbins, who is a fantastic and wonderful author of 8 novels. He was born in July 1932, which makes him 88. And my dad was actually born in 1931, and it's quite weird to think that my dad and Tom Robbins were born very close to each other because they couldn't be more different people. However, that is a digression. So, Tom Robbins, best-selling novelist from America, has had success with 8 novels, including Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, which was made into a movie in 1993, which starred Uma Thurman, Lorraine Bracco, and Keanu Reeves. So the heady heights of Hollywood have been attained by Tom Robbins with his book and film, Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, which is also a fantastic book. And there are many of his other books that I also love, which I will be listing shortly. So Robbins was born in 1932 in Blowing Rock, North Carolina, to George Robbins and Catherine Robinson. Both of his grandfathers were Baptist preachers, and Tom Robbins does mention that he feels a lot of his storytelling came from the preacher side of his family because they gave him the gift of the gab, he claims. The Robbins family resided in Blowing Rock before moving to Warsaw, Virginia, when the author was still a young boy. And he describes himself when looking back on these times as a hillbilly. Robbins attended Warsaw High School and Hargrave Military Academy in Virginia. And he then enrolled at Washington and Lee University to major in journalism. So he did always want to be a writer, and he always did have the gift of the gab and the desire to tell stories. And he was also always a bit of a mischievous cove because he was actually disciplined at the end of his sophomore year after showing bad behaviour and failing to earn a letter in basketball. Would we worry about that? We ask ourselves. In 1953, he enlisted in the Air Force after receiving his draft notice, spending a year as a meteorologist in Korea, followed by 2 years in the Special Weather Intelligence Unit of the Strategic Air Command in Nebraska. He then returned to Virginia, where his poetry readings at the Rhinoceros Coffee House led to a reputation of his in the local bohemian scene. So even then, he was showing his need and desire, sorry, just adjusting you there a little bit, to write poetry and show the world his creative spirit, which is one of the mottos that we will be mentioning in Jitterbug Perfume. He is all about the creative spirit, all about staying creative, eating beets and breathing deeply. By the way, I am trying to represent bees tonight because one of my favourite characters in Jitterbug Perfume is Bingo Pajama, who always has a swarm of bees flying around his head. And I did try to see if I could get a beehive to sit on my head, but it didn't really work out. So I'm afraid I'm just representing it with these lovely colourful beads instead. So in 1962, Robbins moved to Seattle to seek an MA at the Far East Institute of the University of Washington. During the next 5 years in Seattle, he worked for the Seattle Times as an art critic, and he also researched one of my favourite artists, Jackson Pollock, thinking that he might write a book about him. He also wrote a column on the arts for Seattle magazine in 1965, and he wrote for many other publications, including Art in America and Art Forum. So he was always a bit of a major art critic, and this also very much comes into his work because Robbins is completely passionate about all things artistic, music, and of course, perfume, which we will be talking about soon. He was asked to write a book on Northwest art in 1966, but instead he said he didn't want to write a book about art, he wanted to write a novel, and he pitched the idea of what was to become Another Roadside Attraction, his first novel. He then moved to another part of Washington in 1970, and this was where he authored 9 books, though he also spent a couple of years living on the Swinomish Indian reservation, and he does in his books bring in quite a lot of Indian characters from American Indian characters from his time living on the Swinomish Indian reservation, which is another interesting aspect of his books, which doesn't come into the famous Jitterbug Perfume, but is an important aspect of his oeuvre. Michael Dare described Robbins' writing style in the following manner. When he starts a novel, it works like this. First, he writes a sentence, then he rewrites it again and again, examining each word, making sure of its perfection, finally honing each phrase until it reverberates with the subtle texture of the infinite. Sometimes it takes hours. Sometimes an entire day is devoted to one sentence, which gets marked on and expanded upon in every possible direction until he is satisfied. Then and only then does he add a period. This is a very interesting aspect of Robbins's writing because when you read his books, they do feel a bit like he is just gushing away. He is letting it all out. He's letting it all flow. He's allowing his mind to run riot. And it's almost like he's opened a tap and is letting the words pour out. But according to Michael Dare, this is not the case at all. Every word is polished and honed and deeply thought out. Tom Robbins described in his own words that when talking about his writing style and why he thought he might be a good writer, he said, "I'm descended from a long line of preachers and policemen. Now, it's common knowledge that cops are congenital liars and evangelists spend their lives telling fantastic tales in such a way as to convince otherwise rational people that they're factual. So I guess I come by my narrative inclinations naturally." Tom Robbins is someone that spins a shaggy dog tale, and we can't necessarily trust everything that he says. And he has written his own autobiography as well, where you can read all about his life. But that's definitely to be taken with a pinch of salt too. In 1997, Robbins won the Bumbershoot Golden Umbrella Award for Lifetime Achievement in the Arts, that's presented annually at the Bumbershoot Festival in Seattle. So Seattle is very much where his heart is, I think. And in 2000, Robbins was named one of the 100 best writers of the 20th century by Writer's Digest magazine, while the legendary Italian critic Fernando Pivano called Robbins the most dangerous writer in the world. So I wonder if any of you out there have already read his books, and have you read this particular book? I know one of you listeners is a big fan of Tom Robbins, and that's Ollie. So thanks for joining us tonight, Ollie. If you have a moment while watching, Ollie, it would be great if you put in the comments why you love this book so much, because I'd love to share your thoughts with the other viewers as well. And before we move on to talking seriously about Jitterbug Perfume, I just want to tell you about his other book. So we've already mentioned Another Roadside Attraction, Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, Still Life with Woodpecker, which is a fantastic book, all based on the packet of Camel cigarettes. That picture on the front of the Camel cigarettes, which has camels and palm trees. And he meditates for pages and pages on that scene. It becomes a kind of mesmerizing trip on which one of the characters goes into that scene. And at one point, the characters literally go into the scene that's on the front of the Camel cigarettes. So as you can tell from that book, Tom Robbins is something of a magic realist. He is someone who likes to play with reality, to mess with our minds, and to go into different dimensions. And that's one of the reasons that I love him too. That was 1980, Still Life with Woodpecker. Jitterbug Perfume was written in 1984. It's my personal favourite of his books. Other people do have other favourites, such as Even Cowgirls Get the Blues and also Still Life with Woodpecker. Skinny Legs and All, Half Asleep in Frog Pyjamas, Fierce Invalids Home from Hot Climates, Villa Incognito, and B is for Beer, which is a novella. So he's written 8 novels, and he also wrote his memoir, Tibetan Peach Pie, which came out just a few years ago. And I must admit, I haven't read yet. And one of the things I'm really excited about Tom Robbins is I haven't read all of his books. I still got that joy to come. And I do reread Jitterbug Perfume very frequently. But it's lovely to know that I still have the chance to read his other works. And I do think that Tom Robbins is someone that one can't get enough of and one can't get bored of. So let's talk about Jitterbug Perfume and why it's my desert island book and why I prescribe it so often to people. So one of the reasons that I love it is it's all about making the most of life. I'll tell you a bit about the story. So King Alibaba is one of the main heroes, who is a king in the 8th century in a village somewhere in the woods, somewhere in Germany, living in a tribe where at the moment that you show your first sign of mortality or of age, really, you must be executed by your tribe. And King Alabar wakes up one morning near the beginning of the book, and I'm going to read you this section in a little bit, to discover a white hair on his head. And he realizes that this means he's doomed because it's his first sign of aging. And his tribe believes that they should, or they must, sacrifice him so that the next king can come and take over from him. Now, Alabar, the first of any king to ever have done this, decides that he is going to buck the trend and not be killed. And he is going to indeed seek immortality, which is what he spends the rest of the book doing. And we know that he does find the secret of immortality because he turns up in Seattle in 1970. So it starts off in the 8th century in his village where he's about to be sacrificed. And we go all the way to 1970 where he's still alive. And I'm not going to tell you what happens at the end because that would be giving you spoilers, which I don't want to do. So, according to King Alabar, the secret to eternal life and its guiding principle is breathe properly, stay curious, and eat your beets. He also says that you should take many hot baths, have an orgasm a day, and develop this amazing system of breathing where it's a kind of continuous breathing. And he is taught that by the Bandaloop tribe, who have a very special dance, which is also their secret to immortality. So Alabar does escape from his fate and then goes forth and seeks immortality for the rest of the book. And he finds various ways of remaining alive. And the very fact that he escaped death this first time when he was meant to be poisoned and then put on a pyre, in a way seems to give him the luck and chance to survive. But it's not just luck and chance, it's also the way that he works incredibly hard to talk to all the people who are working in ideas about immortality in the world. And Alabar does find methods of remaining full of life, which we can all aspire to too. So that's one of the reasons that I prescribe Jitterbug Perfume so often, because it has this wonderful embracing of life and an incredible joie de vivre. And it also very much touches on Pan, the god Pan, and our relationship with Pan. And Pan in this book is a really excellent character. Quite a lot of the versions of the book show Pan. In fact, he is here on the cover. Don't know if you can see that particularly well, but lots of the other editions of the book have Pan playing his pipes and looking very goaty and very sexual in his full flower of magnificence. And Pan, at the beginning of the book, meets Alabar, and at that point in the 8th century, he's still full of life, but he's gradually fading and becoming fairly invisible because humanity is ceasing to believe in him because of Christianity. So Pan is very anti-Christianity, and Pan does have long conversations with Alabar all about the meaning of life and the philosophy of existence. Pan has a very lusty approach to existence. He often talks about all the wonderful goats that he has had the joy of having sex with, also nymphs. He absolutely stinks of goatiness and sex. He is full of music and joy and joie de vivre, and he is all about espousing the importance of nature to mankind. And he's incredibly depressed that mankind seem to be rejecting their alliance with nature. And I do actually love the message that Tom Robbins is putting in the book about our relationship with nature. He was writing it in 1984, so it wasn't such an obvious message of trying to work in an eco-sensitive way as many people are writing about now. But Tom Robbins was very much aware of our gradual excision from nature and our gradual inability to be at one with nature. And he was very much lamenting the sadness of our gradual severance from nature. So that's another of the reasons that I really love the book and prescribe it to so many people, for its essence of caring about nature and trying to work with nature at all times, and also trying to be in nature as much as possible. Ollie, thank you for your comment. Ollie says that it's this book, Jitterbug Perfume, is so incredibly positive and cathartic, yet it embraces the complexity of life and humanity. The ending is so touching and inspires me with a sense of trust. And there's so much more to it, which is so true. And we're going to talk about all of those layers of brilliance in this book. Just going to have a little sip of water because it's very hot. I hope people in the UK are really enjoying the wonderful heat wave that we've been having. So I'm going to read you, before I talk more about the things that I love about the book, I want to read you the bit about Alibaba when he is first finding the white hair, which means that he is doomed to die. And this is where Alibaba is first introduced, and I think it's just such a brilliant start of a novel. It gets you completely hooked immediately. Although it's not at the very beginning, it's about 8 pages in. The citadel was dark and the heroes were sleeping. When they breathed, it sounded as if they were testing the air for dragon smoke. On their sofas of spice and feathers, the concubines also slept fretfully. In those days, the earth was still flat, and people dreamed often of falling over edges. Blacksmiths hammered the edged serpent on the anvils of their closed eyelids. Wheelwrights rolled it, tail in mouth, down the cart roads of their slumber. Cooks roasted it in dream pits. Seamstresses sewed the badger hides that covered them. The court necromancer traced its contours in the constellation of straw on which he tossed. Only the babes in the nursery lay peacefully passive, even to the fleas that supped on their tenderness. King Alibaba did not sleep at all. He was as awake as the guards at the gate, more awake actually, for the guards mused dreamily about mead, boiled beets and captive women as their eyes patrolled the forested horizons, while the king was as conscious as an unsheathed knife, coldly conscious and warmly troubled. Beside him, inside the ermine blankets, his great hound, Mick, and his wife, Alma, snoozed the night away, oblivious to their lord's distress. Well, let them snore, for neither the dog's tongue nor the wife's could lap the furrows from his brow, although he had sent for Alma that evening, mainly because of her tongue. Alma's mouth, freshly outlined with beet paint, you'll notice the many references to beets so far. We've already had 2. Locking him in a carnal embrace that, while it endured, forbade any thought of the coils beyond the brink. Alas, it could endure but for so long, and no sooner was Alma hiccuping the mushroom scent of his spurt than he was regretting his choice. He should have summoned Wren, his favourite wife, for though Wren lacked Alma's special sexual skills, she knew his heart. He could confide in Wren without fear that his disclosures would be woven into common gossip on the concubine's room. Alibaba's castle, which was in fact a simple fort of stone and wood surrounded by a fence of tree trunks, contained treasures, not the least of which was a slab of polished glass that had come all the way from Egypt to show the king his face. The concubines adored this magic glass, and Alibaba, whose face was so obscured by whiskers that its reflection offered a minimum of contemplative reward, was content to leave it in their quarters, where they would spend hours each day gazing at the wonders that it reproduced. Once a very young concubine named Frol had dropped the mirror, breaking off a corner of it. The council had wanted to banish her into the forest where wolves or warriors from a neighbouring domain might suck her bones, but Alibaba had intervened, limiting her punishment to 30 lashes. Later, when her wounds had healed, she bore him fine twin sons. From that time on, however, the king visited the harem each new moon to make certain that the looking glass had not lost its abilities. Now, on this day, the new moon of the calendar part we know as September, when Alibaba conducted his routine inspection, he looked into the mirror longer, more intently than usual. Something in the secrets and shadows of the imperfectly polished surface had caught his eye. He stared, and as he stared, his pulse began to run away with itself. He carried the glass to an open window, where refracting sparks of sunshine enlivened its ground but refused to alter its message. So soon, he whispered as he tilted the mirror. Another angle, the same result. Perhaps the glass is tricking me, he thought. Magic things are fond of deceptions. Although the day was rather balmy, he pulled up the hood of his rough linen cloak and, blushing like blood's rich uncle, thrust the mirror into the hands of the nearest concubine, who happened to be Frol. The other women gasped. They rushed to relieve her of the precious object. Alibaba left the room. With some difficulty, for others tried to insist on accompanying him, the king excused himself from court and took the giant dog, Mick, for a romp outside the citadel gate. Circuitously, he made his way into the woods to a spring he knew. There he fell to his knees and bent close to the water, as if to drink. Smothered under a swirl of cloudy mixtures, his reflection only spasmodically came into focus. Yet among the bubbles, twigs, and jumbled particles of light and colour, he saw it once more, a hair as white as the snow that a swan has flown over. It spiralled from his right temple. Undirected and unencumbered by thought, King Alibar's hand shot out as if to ward off an enemy's blow. He yanked the hair from its mooring, examined it as one might examine a killed snake, and after glancing over his shoulder to assure that none save Mick was his witness, flicked it into the spring, in whose waters it twisted and twirled for a long while before sinking out of sight. So that's Alibaba at the very beginning of the book, realizing that he has a white hair in his locks, and he must remove it. But he realizes that he's going to be noticed by the concubines, by the members of his tribe, and he can't avoid the ritual of death when he's to be executed. That then follows an incredibly dramatic scene, which I wish I could read you, but it's too long, in which he is surrounded by all of the tribe. They give him a draught to drink, but Wren, his wife, mixed it for him. And it becomes apparent a couple of pages later, this is not giving too many spoilers, that she has mixed the drink so that it just appears that he's asleep, but that he's dead and he's actually still alive. He's then thrown into the pyre, he's buried, and Wren, his trusted wife, digs him up, and off he goes into his new life of adventures and searching for eternal life, which he does indeed seem to find, because he meets all kinds of exciting people who help him to find ways of achieving maximum longevity, including the Bandaloop dance, the eternal breath, which is on an eternal loop, the necessity of the hot bath every day, and lots of sex, as well as curiosity. So that's Alibaba, but there's also many other different aspects of the story, not just Alibaba, although he is one of the main characters. There's also the Lefevre family, who are a fragrance power company in Paris, who are searching for the perfect perfume. And then in Seattle, there's Priscilla, the genius waitress, who is a waitress in a cocktail bar, who spends all her days working incredibly hard, slaving for a pittance of a wage, but she spends her nights searching for the base note of the perfume that she's looking for, because she found a perfume bottle which is several hundred years old, which has a couple of drops of an amazingly intense, incredible perfume, which could just be what humanity needs. She has smelt the perfume which is left in the bottle. There's only a few drops left. And the connections are gradually made between Alibaba, the Lefevre company in Paris, and Priscilla in Seattle. And there are many other characters also woven around these ones. Priscilla meets a man who is obsessed also with finding the secrets of eternal life, who is actually a bit of a charlatan and a fraud who we don't really trust. And she does her best to hang out with him and find her way towards discovering the perfect perfume. Meanwhile, and that he's called Wiggs Danny Boy, and he's a really great character. I do love him as a character. He's great. And meanwhile, Pan is attempting to provide hints to help everyone to discover the secret of this perfume, because Pan knows a lot about smell, being a god who actually smells incredibly strongly himself. He often announces his presence by his smell, which is an extremely goaty, pooey, sexy smell. And it's only during the book that he begins to fade from humanity, because humans are less interested in him because they're becoming Christian, and they're also becoming too obsessed with reason and less interested in nature, that Pan gradually loses his scent and thus loses much of his power. But gradually, as the book progresses and Alibaba helps him, Pan does rediscover his pungency, and this comes with his power too. So it is a book that actually has a trajectory of some sadness with, for instance, Alibaba nearly being killed. Also, Kudra, who becomes Alibaba's love of his life, is meant to be sacrificed in India on a pyre when her husband dies, and Alibaba persuades her basically not to sacrifice herself and commit sati. And Kudra is a highly complex character who Alibaba manages miraculously to stay with for many hundreds of years, which I can't reveal how, but Kudra also learns the secrets of immortality with Alibaba. She has a lot of sadness from her previous life, which she does carry with her down the centuries. And there are some really fantastic moments with Alibaba and Kudra, one of which takes them actually to another plane when they are trying to travel through time, and Kudra gets lost in this kind of wrinkle in time. So, as you can tell, the book has many different strands, with the Alibaba aspect in the 8th century AD, the Seattle waitress, Priscilla, who's looking for the perfect perfume. And then there's also the Paris Lefevre connection, who are an ancient perfume house who are also trying to find this magical perfume, which comes in the bottle which Priscilla has found, which seems to miraculously have these drops of perfume, which she is trying to recreate. So now we have to bring in Bingo Pajama, who lives in New Orleans. So Bingo Pajama is a man of such amazing purity that he emits a scent of absolute gorgeousness, which is irresistible to bees. And he therefore has bees who fly constantly around his head and literally swarm around his head. And he is a kind of Rastafarian genius flower seller who, everywhere he goes, takes the bees with him, and they come with him because they love him. And he is the person who's able to provide the best jasmine on earth because of his relationship with the bees. And Bingo Pajama is one of those characters that you cannot help but fall in love with. He also makes you even more appreciate the miraculousness of the bees in our lives. He makes you want to have your own beehive, or indeed a swarm of bees on your head. And he's someone who actually doesn't appear in the book very frequently. We wish we could see more of him because he is such a fantastic character. But he becomes a legend, possibly because he's there so fleetingly in the book that he completely takes over our imagination. So a little bit more about Alibar's travels. As he heads east, because he, when he was first introduced to us, believes that the earth is flat, until he meets a shaman in the woods who puts him right and says, I've got to tell you something, the world is actually round, would you believe it? The shaman obviously has mystical knowledge before his time because it's the 8th century. And Alibar is completely mind blown by that idea, but he does manage to accept it. He decides to head east for as long as he can until he ends up back at the place where he began, where his tribe began. He meets an 8-year-old Hindu girl named Kudra, who becomes his love of his life, as I was telling you before. He meets the Bandaloop in the Himalayan mountains and lives in a nearby monastery for 20 years, during which time he barely ages a day, strangely enough. Kudra comes to find him now that she's grown up and convinces him to go back to the Bandaloop, and they go and live in the caves with the Bandaloop, where they begin to discover, after 7 years of study, the secrets of immortality, which has to do with the elements of fire, air, water, and earth. And that's where they begin to discover the amazing breathing methods of the Bandaloop as well. Read the book if you want to find the true secrets. They then go on many adventures around the world, living many lives over the course of centuries. But in 1666, in the city of Paris, Alibar and Kudra begin to have doubts about whether they should live forever, whether to keep going, because the age of reason has taken its toll on Pan and his nymphs, who Alibar very much stays in touch with, you'll be glad to hear. And Alibar and Kudra do what they can to care for the now invisible god, because Pan has been slowly fading as humanity begin to lose their faith and their belief in him. In order to hide, they decide to go to America, where they think they will have more freedom to be themselves. And Pan, though invisible at this point, does still have his supernatural stench. He still absolutely reeks of poo, sex, and goatiness. And they attempt to create a perfume in order to hide this stench. And this perfume is what everyone becomes obsessed with 300 years later, because the perfume is such a miraculously wonderful, pungent, powerful perfume that it can't be resisted by humanity. However, the perfume actually is thrown overboard as they're crossing the Atlantic and the bottle eventually winds up in New Orleans in the 20th century. And more of that later. You'll have to read the book to get the whole story. But Priscilla Partido is the one who ends up with the bottle. And really, the book, apart from being about immortality, is also about this fantastic wrangle between the various different perfumier factions of who can find and create the most wonderful perfume in the history of creation. And there are a lot of fantastic books about perfume in the world, which I'm going to be talking about next week in next week's session. But more of that later. So, other themes that I love in Jitterbug Perfume and reasons for why I prescribe it so often and the reasons that I love it so much are reason versus pan, which I have touched on earlier. Tom Robbins does go into some rather fantastically detailed philosophical exhortations about why being obsessed with reason is not necessarily a good thing, and why we should return to a more simple pan-like state. I just want to read you a little bit about Pan versus reason, because we've got to have a little section of Pan this evening because he's such a fantastic character. Pan does speak in a very old-fashioned way. He likes to use the word thou. So I just want to start at a good bit so you get the full flavour. Methinks thou doth speak from freedom, not from vanity, said Pan, and I lift my wineskin to thee, for thou art rare among humans. Sniff! He squirted a stream of wine into his ugly yet sensual mouth. Red rivulets ran into his beard to disappear there, sopped up perhaps by whirls of thirsty wool. Ah, but Alibaba, dost thou not recall my telling thee that gods art immortal for only so long as the world believes in them? Thou hast only to look at me to see how a god dwindles when belief in him dwindles. Immortality has its conditions. Immortality has its limits. And immortality has its dangers. Whatever thou hast learned about death from thy wise men in the East, thou wouldst do well to remember. Yes, go on, said Alibaba. What, Pan? Remember what? Said Kudra. It was no use. Pan had finished speaking and would say no more, nor would he sniff at himself again, for incredibly his native odour had peeled away the perfume that masked it, had slowly burned through the potent excess of patchouli like a sun ray blazing its way through a purple fog, and now, after less than an hour of suppression, the goat gas, that chloride compound of barnyard and bedroom, was boiling again, filling the grotto with a sleazy vapour, a steam to press a rooster's pants. With the return of Pan's stink, there came renewed mischief in his eyes. When he scampered to the cave to fetch his pipes, Kudra and Alibaba began hastily to dress. We have a long journey ahead of us, they explained, and with a curious mixture of relief and regret, they bade their divine host a fast farewell. So that's a little glimpse of Pan. Some people, as you'll get a glimpse from that excerpt, find Tom Robinson's writing a little bit over the top. He does love to have a lot of adjectives. He does love to describe things with great sensuality. And I have to say that's why I love him too. There's so much going on in every sentence of Tom Robbins. But people that like spare, pared down prose will maybe find Tom Robbins a little bit challenging because that is not his style. But I'm someone that loves both. I love spare prose, such as the writings of Tove Jansson, but I also love overblown, over the top, rich and sensual prose, such as that of Tom Robbins. So another reason that I frequently prescribe Jitterbug Perfume to people as a book to read if they're feeling a little bit lacking in passion, lacking in direction, lack of self-confidence is because Priscilla, the genius cocktail waitress, is such a fantastic character. She's really easy to relate to. She's in her early 20s and she has this crappy job in a cocktail bar, but she's obsessed with perfume and she is determined to find and create this amazing perfume that she's got the bottle of in her possession, which we realize is the one that Alibaba and Kudra created hundreds of years ago. And it's Priscilla's absolute obsession, passion, determination, and ability to stay up all night that is really inspiring. So I often give the book to people who are at a change of career or at a change of life when they're not quite sure what they want to do next, or if they have a fantastic idea, but they're maybe just a little bit shy of putting it into practice. Priscilla is a really wonderful example of someone who can fulfill her ambitions by sheer true grit and determination, and that's what she does. So I do think that Jitterbug Perfume is a brilliant book for people to read when they're feeling a little bit at a loss and maybe feeling a bit depressed, because it's also so full of the joys of life, the passion of simply smelling the earth, going out into the trees, meeting people, and loving life. It is a life-loving book, and that's definitely one of the main reasons that I would take it with me onto my desert island. It's a book that you can read again and again and always find different things in. It's multi-layered. It has so many different stories. It is quite a complex book, as Ollie was saying, and it also has the deeply inspiring Bingo Pajama and his bees, who is a kind of Christ-like figure, very saintly, who represents a purity of spirit, which is incredibly lovely and inspiring too. So Jitterbug Perfume has inspired many, many fans over the years. There are cafes named after it. There are cafes named after Bingo Pajama. There's also drinks and perfumes and a whole cult of Tom Robbins and Jitterbug Perfume has grown up over the years. It is one of those books that you give to a friend and you know that once that friend has read it, you share something special. You understand each other in a new way. It's definitely a cult book, which people in the cult feel different to how they did before. They feel radically changed by Tom Robbins. Maybe he really is an incredibly dangerous writer with that power that he has to change us from within. But I feel it's definitely power in a good way. So I would really love all of you to read Jitterbug Perfume if you haven't read it yet. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I just want to share with you a recipe which is from the Gwyneth Paltrow magazine, Goop, which is for a Jitterbug Perfume drink, which I haven't yet made and I really want to try. I'll just give you their description. This drink comes from the millennia-long journey undergone in Tom Robbins' novel of the same name to find the perfect perfume recipe. Along with lemon and jasmine, the secret ingredient turns out to be beets. The syrup takes some time and care to make, but at the end you have a rich crimson syrup and some sugar-boiled beets that are great for a garnish or on the top of a dessert. So you need white rum, lemon juice, green bar jasmine liqueur, beet syrup, and it also gives you the recipe for beet syrup, which is basically beets and demerara sugar. Then you combine them all and cook and then strain eventually. You can find that recipe online on the Goop website, and if anyone makes it, please let me know. I'm going to try and do it myself next week. And talking of next week, I'm going to be doing a very special live bibliotherapy session with Isabel Costello, who wrote this book, Scent. I'm going to spend the first 20 minutes or so talking about perfume in literature generally. So this session, Jitterbug Perfume, could be seen as a preamble to that, because perfume plays a very big part in this book. But I'm going to be talking about the many brilliant novels that contain strong elements of perfume in them. And I'm then going to bring in Isabel Costello to talk about this fabulous book, which has only just come out. And it is again a multi-layered and fabulous book. It is very much about scent and perfume, but it also has really great themes of menopause and what happens to a woman when she is a little bit older, her children are moving away from home, and she is changing her relationship with her husband too. So this is a great book that I'm really looking forward to sharing with you in many levels. And it's one that I'm definitely going to be prescribing people for many different reasons. Ollie's just commented that Jitterbug Perfume forever changed my relationship with beets. I agree. It's a bit like Louis Sachard's Holes, which forever changed my relationship with onions. I did always love onions, but it made me love them even more intensely and in so many different new ways. But I had not been in love with beets before I read Jitterbug Perfume. And now I'm absolutely converted to the joy of the beetroot. And I now will very happily consume them in many different forms. And I see quite how wonderful they are. So do join me next week for my session with Isabel Costello. And before you go, I just want to also mention that tomorrow night on Damien Barr's Literary Salon, you can see Kate Moss being interviewed by the brilliant journalist Sam Baker. That's happening. Oh, what time is it happening? You might have to check the website, but I think it might be 7 o'clock till 8 o'clock. Maybe it's 8 till 9 UK time. If you go to Damien Barr's Literary Salon Facebook page, you'll find it there. And you can buy tickets on the Eventbrite page. They're only a £5. You can, with the ticket, you can join the session live, but you can also catch up and watch it at a later date if you want to enjoy being outside in the sunshine instead. So Kate Moss is the author of a number of international book bestsellers, including The Burning Chambers, The Taxidermist's Daughter, Labyrinth, and many more. She has recently written a really fantastic memoir called An Extra Pair of Hands, which is a heartwarming book that shines a light on the joys and challenges of being a carer, because she was a carer to her mother-in-law, and has had to survive many different aspects of being a carer. And she writes very beautifully about this experience and how it affected her life. So do try and get a ticket for that on Eventbrite, Damien Barr's Literary Salon, or you can go to his Facebook page to find it there. And also join me next week for my very exciting session all about perfume in literature, and inviting Isabel Costello to talk about her book Scent, just out now. I look forward to seeing you then, and thanks for joining me this evening. See you soon.